Sveicināti skatītāji! Mani sauc Evija Blumberga, esmu sargs.lv žurnāliste. Un šodien uz interviju esam aicinājuši stratēģi, pētnieku, vairāku militāru grāmatu autoru, atvaļinātu Austrālijas armijas virsnieku, ģenerālmajoru Miku Raienu. Viņš ir dienējis vairāk nekā 35 gadus un dislocēts Irākā un Afganistānā. Taču šodien ar viņu runāsim par to, kāda ir Ķīnas loma Krievijas karā pret Ukrainu, vai varam gaidīt, ka Ķīna iebruks Taivānā, un kā arī kādas tam būs sekas globālajai drošībai un ko mēs kā rietumi varam darīt, lai to novērstu. It is great to have you here, Major General.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
In your research, you have studied both aggressive actions of Communist China, and now you're writing a book on strategy and adaptation in Ukraine war. But do you see a direct connection between Russia's war against Ukraine and possible China's invasion of Taiwan?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's a direct connection for a couple of reasons. Firstly, China and Russia are clearly collaborating. Xi and Putin have a close relationship. China is providing dual-use goods to Russia for its war, buying its energy, which is providing its money. But at the same time, Russia's war against Ukraine is an authoritarian beating up on a small democracy, which is exactly what China would like to do to Taiwan. So there is a close alignment between the two, and good reason for all democracies to defend both Ukraine and Taiwan.
And as you mentioned, there is close cooperation between Russia and China, and there also have been unconfirmed reports about China providing Russia dual-use technology and even weapons. To what extent do you think China is currently supporting Ukraine in its war?
Well, we know Chinese trade with Russia has accelerated since the beginning of the war. Their exports to Russia have gone up significantly. So there's a lot of goods out of which you can withdraw chips and other technologies that might be used in Russian weapons. I think this has been well established. Once again, buying Russian energy against sanctions regimes. Whether they're providing weapons or not, I'm uncertain about. There certainly have been some reports, but we know the North Koreans have definitely provided a lot of weapons and munitions to the Russians.
And how do you think, what should be Western response to these allegations?
Well, certainly the US Secretary of State, Anthony Blinken, during his recent visit to China, spoke to the Chinese about this and highlighted US displeasure. I think, they have certain economic sanctions they might be able to apply there. They're yet to do that, but certainly there are ways of making our displeasure with China known. Now, whether they're willing to heed them or not is another question, and it really depends what is more important to China, its economic relationships with other countries or perpetuating this war in Ukraine by supporting Russia.
And how do you see what is China's main strategy or goal in this war and the main interest to be part in Russian war against Ukraine?
Well, I think it's less about Xi's brotherhood with Putin. I think it's more about the fact that it keeps Europe focused in Europe. It keeps America focused in Europe. So China continues to gain, or what it thinks is gain power in the Western Pacific. The Chinese have been very insistent. They think the Western Pacific is their sphere of influence. I don't think that's true, but they would like that to be the case. And having America absorbed in Ukraine helps push that case for them.
So you are saying that while we are focusing on Ukraine, that China is playing in the Indo-Pacific region?
Yes, while the cat's away, the mice is playing. Now, the Indo-Pacific Command in Hawaii are obviously very focused on China. But the US administration has split its attention between Europe, the Indo-Pacific as well as the Middle East. That plays into China's hands in some respects.
And there has been also speculations that China is watching how Western allies respond to Russian aggression in Ukraine to be prepared if it invades Taiwan. What China has learned from this?
Well, China's got a long history of observing other people's wars and learning from them, be it the Falklands War, the 1991 Gulf War, Kosovo Air War. So they observe these kind of wars very closely. What have they learned? Well, there's a few things. They've learned how we in the West make strategic decisions about war. They have learned how we're scared of escalation. They've learned how alliances make decisions, how long they take to make decisions. They've learnt about, how we worry about nuclear sabre rattling from Russia. There's a reason why China has decided to expand its nuclear arsenal in the wake of the start of the large-scale war in February 2022. There's a range of other lessons it's learnt, from logistics to information operations to joint operations as well. But at the strategic level, China has been watching closely, and we can be sure that it will evolve how it does business based on what it's seen in this war.
And what should we learn?
Well, there are many things we can learn. Whether we do is a constant issue in military institutions and national security communities. But we should be learning similar lessons. We should be looking at how have we made decisions? Have they been fast enough? Have they been high quality enough? Have different alliances, particularly NATO, worked effectively? I think NATO has been reinvigorated over the last couple of years, which is a really good thing. But how well has it worked to support Ukraine? We should ask those questions. I think it's done a good job, but we can probably do more. I think there's lots of lessons when it comes to new technologies, whether it's the use of drones in warfare, whether it's training for people in very short periods of time that we've seen the Ukrainians have to do, or new era sensor systems that are from civilian sources that complement military sensors and intelligence analysis. So there's a bunch of different lessons that we can learn and evolve ourselves.
Mm-hmm. And we have been seeing that China has made friends not only in Russia but also in the Middle East, especially with Iran. And would you say that there is new axis of dictatorship and autocracies forming, and should we be prepared for that?
Yes, I think so. I'd call them the authoritarian quad of Iran, Russia, China and North Korea. There's certainly an alignment of interest there. They're all challenging the system that has served not just democracies but all countries very well since the end of the Second World War. They believe they have an alternative system where liberty and freedom are not enshrined or values, and they'd like to see that alternative system brought about. Unfortunately, they also have what I call the arsenal of authoritarians. Their defence industries outmatch ours at the moment. They're producing more, whether it comes to missiles and munitions in Russia and China, or just pure shipbuilding capacity in China and places like that at the moment. We should be concerned, and we need to be able to push back against the capability they have.
And can we expect new countries to this axis? There's also this coalition of BRICS countries. Could they join this axis, or it's not such a big possibility?
I'm not sure. I think they value their economic ties with Western countries. I mean, the EU and US are the two largest economic blocs on the face of the planet. I think they also value their own sovereignty, which is not something that Russia or China value with other countries. So, I think the BRICS, they may not be in there providing lots of assistance to Ukraine, but I don't know they have an interest in aligning themselves with the authoritarians either. But it's up to us to maintain our diplomatic and economic linkages with the BRICS and have worthwhile and valuable relationships with them.
And there is also some belief that China in some situation could pressure Russia to stop this war. Is there such a situation possible?
No, I think this is more an alignment rather than one country directing the other. I mean, these are both large, militarily powerful nuclear powers. I don't think one is directing, the whole authoritarian axis, but I think they are certainly influencing each other and they are collaborating behind the scenes.
Mm-hmm. And there's a lot of concern also out there that China could start new conflict in Taiwan. Is it going to happen, and when it could happen?
Well, there's no certainties in warfare, so I don't think anyone can say yes, it definitely will, or no, it definitely won't. But certainly the Chinese president has made clear that he wants to resolve the situation with Taiwan in his lifetime. He's made a lot of speeches about other countries not getting involved. Indeed, at the last Shangri-La dialogue several weeks ago, the Chinese Defence Minister was very belligerent towards Western countries and told them essentially to stay out and not interfere in this particular matter. So I think China is stepping up the rhetoric when it comes to Taiwan. Its coercion using military forces and large-scale exercises around there are stepping up in complexity. They're normalising that behaviour, and we could find ourselves being surprised by the Chinese at some point in the next few years.
So there has been this report that probably China could invade Taiwan till 2027. Is it possible, or no, you would say later maybe?
I think what China will do, whether it chooses an invasion or a blockade or some other option, it will do something that it thinks it can almost guarantee success in. Because for the Chinese Communist Party and President Xi, failure is an existential threat for him personally, but also the Chinese Communist Party would have a crisis of confidence among the Chinese people because it's built the Chinese people up for so long talking about Taiwan being part of China, even though Taiwan has never been part of the modern People's Republic of China. So it's possible, and frankly, one of the things the Chinese could do is surprise us by going much earlier than 2027, because they could make a judgment that we're even less ready to help Taiwan than they are to invade it. That is one potential scenario, but they could well decide to wait as well.
And what would be implications on the world, especially on Southeast Asia, Oceania, and of course Europe?
Well, one of the reasons we want to deter such a war is because it would be catastrophic for the people of Taiwan. They would obviously suffer the most. It would be a humanitarian catastrophe. Thousands, tens of thousands of Taiwanese people would die, and we should be doing everything we can do to prevent that. If a war did break out, it would depend on, whether the US supported Taiwan or not. I think it will, but their policy on it is ambiguous for reasons the US has made clear. If Taiwan was lost, and that would be a disastrous situation, a lot of countries in the region, from Japan to South Korea to Australia, would have to fundamentally reassess the security situation of the Western Pacific, and their relationship with the United States would probably evolve in the wake of that as well.
And would you say there would be also implications for the international order?
I think so, because you might see countries decide to nuclearise. You might see some countries decide to get nuclear weapons. That would be a really big problem for the non-proliferation regime around the world at the moment. We don't want more countries with nuclear weapons. So that would be a problem. China would clearly be more powerful in the Western Pacific. And if we don't defend one democracy in Taiwan, what's to say that any other democracy might fall as well?
Wise words. And now United States is trying to protect democracies in Indo-Pacific, and it's building alliances like with Australia and Japan and South Korea. Is this strategy successful, and what else Western allies can do to prevent invasion of Taiwan?
Well, I think people should understand that there's no NATO in the Pacific. There's no mesh of dozens of countries that are committed to mutual defence. The defence of the Western Pacific is based on bilateral alliances, as you said, between the US and Japan, US and the Republic of Korea, the US and the Philippines, and the US of Australia. And then we kind of branch out relationships off that. So those four relationships, those alliances, will be critical in any deterrence regime, first and foremost, and hopefully we can deter any war. That's the real aim here. But if, the Chinese do something catastrophic, those alliances, their militaries, the bases, their industry, their economies will all be very important in helping to defend Taiwan, as well as defend other countries that the Chinese might decide to threaten in the region as well.
How do you see maybe there should be a Pacific NATO to prevent China's invasion of Taiwan?
I think politics is very different in the Asia-Pacific region. I think the prospects of that are very dim. But there are an array beyond the alliances. There are many security partnerships and relationships. For example, Australia has very strong security agreements and partnerships with countries like Indonesia, with Papua New Guinea, with Singapore, with Malaysia and countries like that. And these kind of partnerships really matter. It may not mean we fight together in a future war, but it does mean there is at least a mutual understanding of the benefits of deterring war in our region.
So you would say that these agreements will work?
Well, to a degree, and it really depends on the nature of the threat to those countries. Australia's closest neighbour is Indonesia, and we have many common approaches to security. We have common values. They're a very large democracy. I think we have common interest in ensuring that China and other authoritarians don't pose a threat to the prosperity or security of our region.
And now in conclusion, maybe we can connect this to Latvia. What could be security threats to Latvia if there is such conflict in Pacific region?
Well, I think once again it's about democracies pushing back against authoritarians, having threats against other democracies. At the end of the day, Taiwan is a small democracy that's proximate to a very large authoritarian. Latvia is a small democracy that's proximate to a very large authoritarian. And my view is either all democracies are worth defending or none aren't. So Latvia is every bit as important to defend as Taiwan. The people of Latvia think that. I'm sure the people in NATO think that. So I think that's where there's an alignment of values in defending democracies wherever they exist.
Thank you for having this interview. It was a great pleasure to have you here.
Thank you. It's my pleasure and a real privilege to visit Latvia.